Welcome everyone to today's Nonprofit Bistro live webinar session. Great to have all of you here this afternoon. My name is Scott. Joining me behind the scenes of today's session are my colleagues Joel, Kelly, and Shanaz. We are all with the Community Development Unit of Alberta Culture. And we have a wonderful panel today that is going to help us explore our topic. And I'll introduce our panel guests in just a few minutes. Our panelists today will be sharing their experiences, insights, and lessons learned from embarking on a restructuring of their own nonprofit organization. Some of the areas that they'll be touching on will include, like, how did the board recognize the need to restructure, the whole restructuring process, some of the challenges and risks associated with it, as well as some tips, strategies, and insights for other nonprofits who you might be thinking about doing such a thing. And again, this is all part of our Nonprofit Bistro series to ensure nonprofit organizations that you have the knowledge, skills, and tools to be successful. There are many different reasons why a nonprofit might choose to restructure. For example, a nonprofit organization may be experiencing significant expansion and its governance structures need to change in order to meet that growth. Or a nonprofit may be experiencing some headwinds and need to make changes to its programming and governance structures as a result of that, or even both. Regardless of the reasons for the need and or desire to restructure, we hope that today's sessions with our three panelists will give participants, will give all of you an opportunity to hear some tips and strategies and what to think about when considering a restructuring process. And again, there will be opportunities to ask our panelists questions too after we ask them some questions in the formal part of our conversation today. So on behalf of the Community Development Unit, it's my pleasure to introduce our Nonprofit Bistro session, Restructuring a Nonprofit Board Organization. A panel discussion, we're going to look at the Al-Rashid Foundation experience. In today's session, our three guest panelists are going to respond. We're going to ask them a series of questions, and I'm going to ask them, and we're going to hear about their restructuring process that they went through as part of the Al-Rashid Foundation Mosque in Edmonton. I'd like to also point out that during today's session, you'll hear reference to the Arabian Muslim Association, or AMA as it's sometimes abbreviated, as well as the Al-Rashid Foundation of Canada. The AMA, or the Arabian Muslim Association, is the original incorporated name of the nonprofit that operates the mosque and several other associated entities. You'll hear more about that. The Al-Rashid Foundation of Canada has recently been incorporated as part of the restructuring process. You'll hear more about these governance and restructuring details again throughout the session, but I just wanted you to be aware of those terms, those two key organizations that you'll hear a lot about from our panelists. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce our guest panelists for today's session. Our first guest is Najib Abu-Ghosh, sorry, Najib. And Najib is a retired chartered professional accountant who operated his own accounting firm for 40 years. Najib has served on the board of the Arabian Muslim Association, remember them I just chatted about earlier, that governs and operates the several associated nonprofits, including the Al-Rashid Mosque, for over 37 years. His current role is as vice president. Also with us today is Aslam Bhatti. Aslam Bhatti has had a long career working in senior management positions in government and nonprofit health organizations, including being the Assistant Deputy Minister at Alberta Health, Vice President of the Alberta Cancer Board, and Vice President of the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer. For the past 8 years, he has served as Executive in Residence with the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. Aslam is currently a member of the Restructuring Committee of the Arabian Muslim Association and also board member of the Al-Rashid Foundation of Canada. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Sami Salama. Dr. Sami Salama has had a PhD in microbiology and Chief Scientific Officer of Fedora Pharmaceuticals, Inc. and CSO of Brass Dome Ventures Limited. In the nonprofit world, Dr. Salama is chair of the Restructuring Committee at the Arabian Muslim Association. He is also board chair of the Al-Rashid Education Foundation, a nonprofit promoting post-secondary education of marginalized communities. As you can see, we have three very knowledgeable panelists with us today to share their learnings and wisdom of their own organization's restructuring experience. Before we get going, with our panelists, a couple of reminders. The focus of today is an exploratory level discussion of the restructuring process that the Al-Rashid Foundation Mosque overtook, with our panelists sharing their insights, their lived experiences, and lessons learned. The views, opinions, and perspectives of the panel members are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the government of Alberta and are not intended to constitute legal or professional advice. On that note, for your own organization's specific situations or questions, you may need to seek advice from a professional in that related area. The first question that is, I really would like to hear from our panelists, and just to set the context to understand where all of this is coming from. Just can you give us, first of all, a brief history of the Arabian Muslim Association and the Al-Rashid Foundation Mosque? And Najib, I'm going to turn it over to you just to give us some context of that history that I think is probably going to underpin some of the comments on restructuring that are going to come a little bit later. Over to you, Najib.
Thank you, Scott. I'm pleased to provide this history, as I do think it'll provide good context to the overall discussion. Muslims first started arriving in Canada in 1871. By 1931, the Census of Canada had registered 645 Muslims. By the mid-30s, many of these Muslims found their way into Western Canada and especially Northern Alberta. And the vast majority of these Muslims were coming from Lebanon and Syria. And while they were here, they were practicing commerce and trade, and many of them prospered. By the late 1930s, we had approximately 100 Muslim families, and they began to find that there was a real need for them to be able to practice their faith, which is Islam, and their culture. In 1938, the original Al-Rashid Mosque was constructed. It was the first mosque built, purpose-built in Canada, and the second in North America. This mosque served the Edmonton community for the next 44 years to 1982 as a place of worship and a community center. I would like to point out, and this is more to what you were alluding to, Scott, in the introduction, that the organization that was formed in 1938 was the Arabian Muslim Association. And we have to remember that practically all of the Muslims here in Edmonton were either from Lebanon or Syria. So they were definitely Arabs. And so the name Arabian Muslim Association comes from that. And that was the name of the original organization, and that name still stands today. The mosque itself, though, was named the Al-Rashid. So Al-Rashid meaning the straight path. So during this discussion, you will hear reference to the Arabian Muslim Association, or the AMA, being the official name of the organization. And of course, we will talk about the Al-Rashid Mosque being the actual mosque or building where everything happens. Now, in 1982, a new Al-Rashid Mosque was constructed in North Edmonton to serve approximately 20,000 Muslims that we had here. The original mosque was moved to Fort Edmonton Park, where it resides today. The current Al-Rashid Mosque now serves today over 90,000 Muslims, representing 62 cultures and nationalities right here in the greater Edmonton region. What's important to note is that during the first 44 years, that being like from 1938 to 1982, the community needs were very simple. Community needed a place to worship, and they needed a place to meet. The worshiping at that time was primarily limited to Fridays, which is the Islamic day, the Sabbath day in Islam, and the 2 annual celebrations of fasting and the pilgrimage. After the new Al-Rashid Mosque was opened in 1982, the community leaders started adding some additional programs. So over and above a place to pray and a place to meet. So they started adding programs, including many religious programs, whether it be like a Sunday school, but primarily oriented to the youth of the community, and Arabic language lessons, with Arabic being the language that the Holy Quran is written in. However, over the last 20 years, that being from 2002 to 2022, the community needs here in Edmonton have just exploded. We're trying to serve now over 90,000 Muslims who have come from practically all over the world. During this time, the community leaders built and opened the Edmonton Islamic Academy in 2006. This academy offered religious and academic studies, including the Alberta Education Regular Curriculum. 1,500 students are now enrolled in the academy from preschool all the way up to grade 12. And further to that, also during this same 20-year period, the Arabian Muslim Association has developed a scholarship foundation, which offered $70,000 in scholarships in 2021, an Islamic daycare that is there for 100 children, a banquet facility that can serve up to 1,000 guests, an Islamic cemetery that facilitates the Islamic burials, an Islamic funeral society that facilitates the Islamic rites of washing and burial, a Quran Academy that hosts over 700 students where Muslims can study the Quran, including memorization. The academy has graduated students as young as 11 years old. And I attended, there was actually, I think, 2 of them, a brother and a sister, and I actually attended the sort of the celebration ceremony, and to see like 11 years old have memorized the entire Quran. And then finally, the Arabian Muslim Association has developed or created an investment corporation that's looking at a seniors and family living facility, a grand mosque, a recreation center, and a second Islamic school. Finally, I would like to point out that with all of this growth, especially over the last 20 years, the governance structure of the Arabian Muslim Association did not change. The board of directors, which is 9 people, going back to the 1938, that's how many board members there were, and we still have 9 board members on the Arabian Muslim Association. And so what has happened is that these 9 guys, with all of this growth, have become hands-on working, hands-on working board. And of course, we're all volunteers. We're trying to manage today over 100 programs, services, and activities, plus all the initiatives that I had mentioned above. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Najib. And I'm just actually finishing our contexting that we're doing just to make sure everybody understands when we start talking about the restructuring part, how it all comes together. Aslam, do you want to just quickly go over the org chart for the group too? For again, I put it up there on the screen, and maybe just a few points that'll help people understand some of the key parts here.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So as Najib mentioned, we're still the AMA board, the Arabian Muslim Association board, and the various entities, as indicated by Najib, are indicated below on your left-hand side. Facing the screen is the Al-Rashid Mosque, the school, the Islamic Academy, and so on. And then there's also the investment corporations and so forth. Now, currently, each of them try to do their own financial communications and so forth. We try to coordinate it into one, but it's not from an organizational structure point of view that's strongly established. And that's one of the reasons why we're looking at the restructuring committee and the whole reorganization. The other key thing to remember is that these organizations in this chart deal with all three levels of government, the federal, the provincial, and the municipal governments. And they deal with actually over, I'd say at least 90 nonprofit organizations, okay? Like similar to us being a nonprofit, we deal with other in excess of 90 nonprofit organizations. For example, like the Big Sisters and Brothers organization, Boyle Street, Native Healing Center, the Interfaith Housing Initiative with the United Church, Habitat for Humanity, and so forth. So the community is not just engaged within itself, okay? It's very broadly engaged with the Canadian society and obviously mostly with the Edmonton and the surrounding area. But we do have outreaches, into Ontario and other places as well. And so we're very well integrated from that perspective point of view.
Okay. Well, thank you, Aslam, for finishing off the contexting. Now, let's just dive right into the whole part where we're going to the restructuring and the modernization of the Al-Rashid Foundation. Samik, do you want to start us off on some thoughts around that? What were some of the things that were happening in begin the story of the restructuring modernization of the Al-Rashid Foundation?
Yeah, I'll be very happy. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. And thanks, Najib and Aslam, for setting the stage. So considering the complexity of the organization, and as you have seen, it has grown tremendously in terms of numbers and in terms of programs. So the board became very aware that the current structure for the board could not continue as it was in order to be able to serve the community in the best way it can. So the board came to the decision to restructure, and they decided to establish a board advisory committee on board governance and organizational structure. And I'm going to refer to that name over and over, but I'm just going to say the restructuring committee or the committee for ease. So the first thing to do was that we set off was to set the committee members, and we needed to really put some clear criteria who those board members, what are their qualifications are. So we took 4 points that were really very important in defining the qualifications. So first of all, obviously, we needed to have members on the committee that have a deep knowledge in governance and restructuring. That's a very obvious and very important element that any organization that thinks about restructuring to have to understand completely the role of governance. Also, it became very important to understand the complexity of the organization and deep knowledge of the organization itself, because not all organizations are the same. They have different goals and objectives. So we needed to make sure that the members of the committee have deep knowledge of the organization itself. And of course, there are the practical things that come into mind, which is in terms of, what else do we need to have? So we needed to have individuals that are very familiar with financial elements. They're very familiar with the not-for-profit laws. And if this is, as we are, a charity sanctioned by CRA, we needed to make sure that the members are familiar with CRA's charity regulations. Of course, also on a practical end, we needed to make sure that the organizational management knowledge and accounting are also within that committee. One thing that we also considered, considering the diversity of the community, as Najib had mentioned, there's over 60 different nationalities within the community. We needed to make sure that there is good representation of the committee members. So I was asked to chair this committee, and I was tasked with identifying members of the committee. So that was the first thing that we did.
Okay. Well, maybe connected to that too is, some of the key parts that had to be in place, and, the understanding governance, and some of the key people that you needed to have there. But when did the Arabian Muslim Association board realize there was a need for restructuring? What do you think was not working that made you think that you needed to restructure? Some things had to be done differently. We couldn't go on the path that we're on.
Yeah, I think the board has become aware for quite some time that a restructuring was imminent, that we needed to do that. We have grown substantially. The board members have become, as Najib and Aslam had said, have become really more of a hands-on rather than a policy board. So there was, the meetings were dominated by discussions around things that could be run by the administration rather than the board itself. Of course, being volunteers, the board was overburdened, and although the organization continued to grow, we lacked good governance and a management framework. So we had many reasons to move forward towards a new governance framework of a policy board with the appropriate management framework to carry out these policies. So one of the things that sort of signaled the need for restructuring was the age of the organization, and is this organization able to adjust to future growth plans? As Najib had mentioned, we had set for the future over very, very large plans to grow from new schools to grand mosques, etc. So there was significant growth potential that the organization. So the question was, are we able with the current structure to handle that? The growing organization was also well beyond the initial mandate, from, as Najib had mentioned, from the need from a culture as well as a religious need to the diverse needs of the community now, which spans educational as well as social needs for the community. Having one board to run a handful of programs was okay, maybe in 1938, 1960s and 70s, but with over 100 programs, it was quite impossible for a board of this size. Incidentally, I think it's the same board that still governs the organization that was set in 1990. So the same board has been really running the organization. Maybe Najib can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the same board that has been running the organization since the early 1990s. So you can see that time was coming. The board is responsible for the mosque building, as well as over $80 million in physical assets, as well as an operating budget of approximately $6 to $7 million annually. This, in addition, as I mentioned, to the growth plans of over $100 million in future investments, there was an absolute need to put the brakes on and to think, how can we disperse the responsibilities and the liabilities among several boards?
Yeah. Well, certainly growth was a big part of things were happening around you and things needed to change, it sounded like, as a result of that. Aslam, question for you. as we start to now, you need to do it. We need to go forward. So what was that vision for that restructuring? What was kind of playing, and as you thought ahead, what was that vision? What was that about?
Yeah, so just following up from Sunny, our last bylaws were established in 1994.
Oh,
And so, you can tell that, there's a need for us to update them as well as the organization and so forth. So, it was well-entrenched organization, as you can tell, with a board of directors of 9 people that have been there for, 25 to 30 years and so forth, right? So we had to take one step at a time. And so the first step that we thought we would take, of course, is to figure out an approach, and we had to come up with a renewed vision and a mission. Okay, I mean, the organization, the AMA, had a vision from before, but it was directed more towards the organization itself becoming a national Islamic organization. Okay, we'd achieved that. Now we needed to move on from there, from an entity to actually what do we want to accomplish, for society and for our membership. Okay, so we worked on the mission and the vision to enable that, and subsequently we focused on the values. Okay, what are going to be the values for the organization? And I mean, values are how an organization conducts itself in carrying out its mission, how the people behave and so forth. Okay?
right.
And so we check ourselves on those values every step that we take, so to speak. Okay. And once we had done that, or that's how we outlined it to the board, that, a new vision, a new mission, values, let's get that sorted out. Okay. And then once that's done, then we'll take a look at the structure.
Okay.
And so that's how we started.
Was there, as you were developing the vision and mission and that piece, did you get any feedback from the community or your stakeholders at that time as you're changing direction? Some of the thoughts and from the vision mission side of things, from getting input or community, from your community or your stakeholders at that point.
Yeah. So what we were hearing from the community was a demand for more services. Okay, and they wanted to bring the community together. We were growing, as Najib has said, we have a lot of young adults and young children and so forth. So we needed to have more programs, from that perspective point of view. One of the programs that Najib mentioned was the Islamic school that we, built in 2006. It's got 1,500 students. It's got actually a waiting list of 600 students right now.
Wow.
This September. And so that's why we're looking at building a second school within the next few years. The other thing that the organization got involved in was the broader community. And, one of the key things about that one is for the past few winters, when we've had really cold nights, we've actually opened up our mosque and housed the homeless overnight. And so we made an arrangement with the city of Edmonton through the bus from their transportation department that they would pick up the people in the evening, deliver them to the mosque. Okay, we would give them bedding and food and so forth. They can stay overnight, and then in the morning, have breakfast, wash up, and then they would be taken back.
Okay.
And so the community was not just looking after its own people, but now it was getting much more broadly involved. And as I said, we communicate with over 90 different nonprofit organizations to see how we can help each other, and there are nonprofit organizations that have helped us quite a bit as well.
Okay. Najib, I got a question for you is, how did the board members react when the suggestion of restructuring was brought up? Were they happy, or how did they express, as this is, big change. What was their reaction when the suggestion of restructuring came about?
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Najib.
Oh, sorry
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that. I'm quite sure that all 9 members of the board of the Arabian Muslim Association understood the need to restructure the entire organization, and including some of our sister organizations. And as well, we also understood that we had to change the management and the staff side of the organization. You asked, were we happy or not? That all depended on where we were in the process of restructuring. I think the main reservation of the current board members was related to having new people on various new boards of our sister organizations. They were concerned that, people would not have the same experience or history that we had, and that there was a concern that perhaps they may take that organization down a different path. I think as well as there was consideration for the additional costs related to the restructuring of the organization. It was definitely going to create new management positions. And of course, there are costs related with that. So, everybody understood the need to do it. But the ride, has been a little bumpy, So
Yeah, fair.
So-
I'm sure that would be the case. Just with that, maybe I'll send this question Aslam's way. And I think probably our people listening in will really be tuning into your response to this question. If there were reservations now, I'm going to ask you from the board, but I'm sure from anybody in your organization, how did you convince them to go forward with this suggestion? We need to restructure. And if there was reservations, how did you handle that?
Yeah, I'd like to build a little bit on what Brother Najib said, in terms of were they happy or not and so forth, but there were some key things that actually needed to get done. We were starting to worry about legal liabilities. And there was, we needed a little more of a clarity on our vision, because we had broadened our scope rather than working just towards having a strong Islamic national organization. We wanted to be part of the broader community, so that we needed to readjust our vision from that perspective point of view. And frankly speaking, with Najib and the other board members, there's kind of burnout among them, because they're hands-on working board, and they're working 6-7 days a week and evenings and so forth. And so there was a number of things, and even from an organizational structure point of view, as you can tell from board governance, right? If board members get involved in day-to-day activities, your staff are going to get confused. Well, okay, who do I listen to? Do I listen to a board member, or do I listen to my boss? And so forth. Right? In terms of dealing with the board, and how do we, when they had reservations, what did we do, type of a thing. I think, the approach that we used as a restructuring committee, was constant reminder on why we are doing this. Okay. Brother Sami in the restructuring committee, you asked us to do something for you. Okay. And so we actually kind of throw it back at them, well, hold it, you set us up, to do this. Right. And so then that gets their attention, so to speak.
Yeah, constant reminder why we're doing this.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the other approach was that we did it bit at a time. Okay. So, you just don't come in and say, all right, we've got the solution, you're going to be the best governed organization, and these are all the things you need to do and so forth, right? Because it's really hard to absorb all of that, right? And so you do step at a time, so to speak, right? You get validation from them, right? You make sure that they understand, because they do have concerns, right? I mean, just imagine if you were 9 people that have been running an organization for 25 to 30 years, right? And now we're coming in saying change, okay? And they're saying, geez, we're going to kind of lose control, right? Not they themselves, but just in terms of the direction, so to speak, and so forth, right? So we assured them that, the structure can change, but just remember, it's the board policies that govern, okay, how the organization is going to work. So you're really actually not going to lose control, because the board will set the policies, and the structure, however we set it up, will implement it.
So providing that assurance is really important then. Yeah.
It's very important, because when you're a working board, an administrative board, you do both, right? And so you can't see that distinction, right? And then, of course, with a governance board, you can set up better accountabilities. And so you also state that to them.
Okay.
And finally, I guess the point was that, we kept on emphasizing to them that, we have to take a look at our today's environment and the diversity that we face. Okay. Both my colleagues mentioned, over 64 different nationalities that are Muslims and so forth, right? That's different than what Najib mentioned, that in 1938, it was just Lebanon and Syria, and they were just Arabs, right? And now we've got, like myself being a Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Nigerians, Moroccans, and so forth.
Thank you, Aslam. We're now, clearly we need to do this. We need to move forward. It's been established. Let's now some questions moving into the process of doing it, of that whole steps that you had to take on from 2019, moving, and even further back where some of the, where things were started, we know we need to move forward. Now I want to have some questions right on that process of, so what were, for the board members, what would you say would be like the top 5 priorities of restructuring? We know we need to do it. Where did you start? What did you want to achieve? What was the goals of the board members? Sammy, I'm going to turn it over to you for some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think now you understand the context of where this board was coming from, and you understand that the same board has been sitting in this position for over 30 years. Although they haven't been really, they have been very, very busy. I think one of the dangers that we've seen is that the community becomes very comfortable and is probably not positioning itself for growth. That's probably one of the biggest dangers that you will see if you were to have the same board with the same ideas. So one of the major priorities that the board has set is that we needed to rejuvenate the board. We needed to bring in new blood into this board. That's number one. Bring ideas, bring thoughts, bring vision, bring energy. The second element that the board has also considered is that a board should be a policy board, and it should not be running, looking after janitorial or looking after the color of the paint on a wall, or it's supposed to be a policy board, running strategic direction. So this board, with the restructuring, hoping that we can create policy, look after strategy and growth without the encumbrance of being a working board. The third element that I can think about is that we needed to create a separate board for Rashid Mosque. You understand, Rashid Mosque is probably the major focal point for the community, regardless of their backgrounds. Everybody looks at the Rashid Mosque itself as being the major entity. However, the Rashid Mosque, as you have seen in the diagram that we put on the screen earlier, the Rashid Mosque is just one of the organizations within the larger AMA organization. So we needed to really separate the day-to-day responsibilities of a Rashid Mosque into a board by itself and establish a board for Rashid Mosque. And then from there, let that board basically run the affairs from a policy point of view by appointing an executive director and then having that executive director and staff look after the day-to-day affairs. That was really the largest workload, I think. We also needed to create new positions for accountability. This is one of the main objectives. So like I said, we needed to assign a director for the mosque, but also we needed to assign a chief executive officer for the AMA. We established actually a new organization, as you mentioned at the very outset, Al-Rashid Foundation of Canada, as the new board. As you've heard from before, the Arabian Muslim Association, a name actually, it does not reflect the community as right now, and probably does not reflect the objective, the original objectives do not reflect the need for the community right now. So one of the main reasons we established a new organization, Rashid Foundation of Canada, is to really to transition into this policy. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to also identify a chief executive officer for the larger mother organization that would look after the affair of the entire community under one umbrella. We also wanted to involve more. That was another priority, to involve more people from the community to promote diversity. If you look at our board right now, there's a strong Middle Eastern presence within that board. So we really wanted to bring more of a diverse group into the new board.
Okay, well, with that, Sami, just quickly identify some of the key people that were involved, and also, did they have a terms of reference? Did you work within a terms of reference, or what kind of thing guided the parameters of this group? Again, who were some of the people, but and some of the expertise that you're looking for, and what guided them as you moved forward in the restructuring process?
So yeah, we did put together a terms of reference document, which was drafted, and then it was run by the board for board approval. And then we brought in, first member was really after I sat down with the chair of the MA board. I sat down with Brother Aslam. I had known him. We had known him through our joint projects in the past. And then we sat down together to identify also other members. So Dr. Sharif Al-Barad, who was the Associate Dean of Business at McEwen University, he brought in the expertise, financial expertise, being an accountant himself as well. We brought in Scott Reed, who was the director for Nordic Mechanical Organization, are about the same size as our organization, that dealt with the same sort of management issues, similar management issues to what we did. So we wanted to bring him to support that management arm. And as well, we brought in Muhammad Assaf, who's the Vice President for Finance for the BRIC Corporation. And we also wanted to bring him in from a management point of view. So that was the committee that we struck together.
Yeah, so certainly we were very intentional on getting some key people in there that you need to make it happen. Aslam, I'm going to turn it over to you. Just talk a little bit more about this, to the terms of reference that guided this group, the importance of how that is when you're embarking on restructuring and following that and having it very clear.
Yeah, so as Sami said, we did have a terms of reference, and then the first thing, under our terms of reference for the new organization, the Al-Rashid Foundation of Canada, and so we've created that and we've set it up as a non-profit organization and separate from the AMA. So that'll be the mother organization. But we wanted to make sure was all the other entities, okay, their missions and visions aligned with the new vision for ARFC, And as I said earlier, that one of the first things that we did was come up with a new vision, and we worked with the board for quite a lengthy period of time, just so everybody could be on the same page, right? And so, our new vision is a strong Muslim community preparing generation of leaders contributing to prosperity for all Canadians. Okay, so you could see the shift from being the national Islamic organization to one that is creating leaders in the future that helps all Canadians. Yeah. And then we have to talk about growth and mitigation strategy in our terms of reference. How would we do that? The governance and the organizational structure, specific board structural legalities, right? And then, with the colleagues that Brother Sami mentioned, making sure that we have efficient internal controls, the best practices in terms of managing this large organization. So Yeah, we met a few times with ourselves as the restructuring committee, bounced ideas out about vision, mission, and so forth. And then we decided that we would break ourselves into two groups. One would deal with the governance side of it, and the other one would deal with the structural side of it, because their expertise lay in the structural side. And so Sami and I became the governance people, and then the other 3 or 4 colleagues became the structural side. I guess, the final point that I want to make is that we are an advisory committee to the board. Okay, so we actually don't make decisions on our own. We suggest, which direction that the board should go in, and we give them options and we talk it out and so forth. So we are in an advisory capacity.
Okay. And just again, honing in on that advisory to the main board, get just you reporting how did the committee report to the board? What did that look like?
Maybe I can take that on.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, an 80-year-old organization with a board that's been sitting for 30 years, it's like a big ship that's really takes a long time to turn. So that required us to really have many meetings. This committee was struck in 2019. We still have not finished our work. So anything I would advise here is there's a lot of patience. But we basically brought in all committee members to some key meetings. We've held several in person and several virtual. Of course, with COVID, there was a lot of virtual meetings, but we've held several meetings. But for key meetings where we were discussing the vision and the mission, that required really all of the committee to attend these meetings with the board. And really to be able to adjust and change the language in response to what feedback we had from the board. So many meetings. I can't really remember, off the top of my head, but I would say, dozens and dozens of in person, and taking that feedback and readjusting and then representing each and every time.
Okay. I'm going to skip ahead just a bit here. What were some, and Aslam, this is a question for you. What were some of the restructuring suggestions that the committee made and why? What were really into these suggestions, how that, why you made them, and just because the committee to the board, that's a very, important part of this dynamic when I'm sure as you're going through this. And just to give us a little bit of background of some of those restructurings that the committee made and why.
Yeah, so as a restructuring committee, we would sit there and talk about and say, okay, how are we going to get to this to the board, and how are we going to do this? Or, two things actually, are important, just like in life, first of all, trying to get the attention of the board. Okay, so make sure that, they're focusing, because you don't make it lengthy, you want to get the brief. But the other thing is also, you need to anticipate what questions that they may ask, and so we spent a fair amount of time thinking about the questions that the board may ask, and like it happens in life, right? You think of, let's say, 15 questions, and 2 get asked, so you put in a lot of work, but the point is you're prepared, right? Because as soon as you show a sign of confusion, or you don't know what you're talking about, right, then the message gets kind of afraid, and so that was one of the things that we did, was how to get the attention of the board, be prepared on what questions that they may ask. But then what we also did, actually, and this is the influence area, right, is we met with the board chair, behind the scenes, okay, before going to a board meeting, right? So we would consult with Brother Najib, who sits on the board, but is not part of the restructuring committee, and say, well, what do you think about this idea? Who do you think is going to say what? Because he knows these people well. And then we would meet with the board chair and have that discussion with the board chair over coffee type of a thing, and then get their feedback. And so we're better prepared. Now, I assume what's happening here, apart from what Sami and I were doing, this little exercise, is that Najib and the board chair were probably going back to the board one-on-one and feeling them out, because they knew what's coming up at the board next meeting when we were going to present, right? And so that way, everybody's in the know, so to speak, and nobody's surprised.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So from a strategy point of view, you just need to make sure you get their attention, you're prepared, and you don't want to surprise people.
Najib, I'm going to turn it over to you, and even to add to, as I'm venturing down this path again, how are the board members feeling with the recommended changes to some major structure changes that you were putting forward? Was there any resistance or reservations? How were they received by the existing board? If you can kind of put those three those questions together, what were some of the thinking, just to give our participants listening today just a sense of what from the side of the board, how they were feeling about it all?
Well, I think initially only a portion of the board really appreciated the significance of the restructuring. So, for example, Brother Aslam was just saying that the restructuring committee often would meet with myself and the board chair to talk about what the next steps would be. And then the board chair and myself, we would then talk to the rest of the board prior to the meetings that we were having with the restructuring committee. And so, but I could tell that it was just, although there's only like 9 people, maybe, half really, really appreciated the significance of the restructuring. I would say that the other half of the board, they were just going along with the idea. So you have to remember that we're a board of volunteers, and we all come from different backgrounds. So even though I had been an accountant like for 40 years, and I did bring some professional skills to the board, other members weren't always like that. And so they kind of depended on some of us on the board to do the appreciation of that this was really serious, and they would just go along with it. Also, I believe that the majority of the board didn't really appreciate how much of the responsibility was going to be transferred from the board of the Arabian Muslim Association to the new board of the Al-Rashid Mosque. So as was mentioned earlier by, I think, Brother Aslam, one of the first tasks the restructuring committee was trying to pull off was the creation of a new board to look after the operations and the governance of the actual Al-Rashid Mosque. So, initially, back in 1938, that's all there was. These 9 guys, the 9 people got together in 1938 and said, okay, we need to create an organization so that we can have a mosque. So 85 years later, this mosque has taken on a life of its own. When I think about, the governance and the responsibilities of the current board, the majority of our attention is focused on the programs and services that the Al-Rashid Mosque is providing, and so the creation of a new board just to look after the Al-Rashid Mosque was like a big thing. These 9 guys had been used to looking after the affairs of the Al-Rashid Mosque, and setting the direction and all that kind of stuff, even down to the detail of, like Brother Samia said, we would sit down if we were going through like a renovation of the mosque. We'd be looking at the colors on the wall, the texture of the carpet that we were praying on. Okay, and so it had become very, very personal to the current board, and that really was not appreciated by the majority of us in terms of how much responsibility we were going to actually be putting on a brand new board.
Okay. Great. Sammy, some question for you here. What were some of the risks that were involved in this restructuring, and how did you mitigate them? Just give us some thoughts around that as you looked at it from a risk perspective.
Mhm. I think one of the main concerns that we had was people will get tired and we will abandon the restructuring process altogether. I think, as we mentioned at the outset, this takes time. It's a scary thought. And I loved some of the words that were shared on the chat when you asked the question at the very beginning. I think I agree with every single one of them. But it does take time. It does take a lot of time. It does a lot of asking. So one of the risks we had was, would the board get tired of this and say, never mind, let's go back how we were? The other thing was, would the community see it in the same way as the board would see it? We had to relay back to the board and then make sure that we give them comfort. So we had to constantly remind and reassure that this is intended for the good. We had to meet with the community on a regular basis to assure the community and explain to them that this is the right thing. And we always receive very positive feedback once the community understood what this was intended for. Same thing with the staff. I think one of the major things that, as soon as we actually avoided using the word restructuring at the very beginning, because restructuring meant layoffs. And to the staff, we had to go back and meet with the staff. Brother Aslam and I sat with the staff on a number of occasions, and not just the Rashid Mosque, but the other organizations as well, to get feedback, but also to reassure this is not intended as a layoff process. So that's something that you have to pay attention to as an organization. Choose your words carefully, but choose them with intent. That you really have a vision for this. Like I said, everything takes time to put together, to execute. We are still not done. So we just wanted to make sure that things get done in time. And finally, I say, repeat and repeat and repeat the message. Like Najib said, it's not everybody on the board comprehends the magnitude of what you're trying to do in the same level at the same time. So you really have to keep repeating that message over and over to get the buy-in.
Yeah. Choose your words carefully, but with intent. That's hearing those. That's some important words of wisdom there. So yeah, thank you for that. Final question as we're looking at the process before we're going to move into the impact in a second here, but just one last question on the whole process. When the board decided to start the restructuring process, what were some of the challenges, like some of the real specific challenges that it encountered during that work? For example, legal, compliance, financial, those type of things. Najib, can turn it over to you. Maybe some examples of some specific things that that you had to overcome, and you had to deal with.
Yes. Well, first of all, the restructuring committee did have some real knowledgeable people on there. For sure, Sameh and Aslam, when it came to the governance, they knew it inside out. And so we could always depend on them to know what they were talking about and to make sure that we had covered, all the issues. Dr. El-Barad, who, is the Associate Dean at Grant McEwen, and Muhammad Asaf, who's, the VP at the Brick Corporation, they also brought a lot of skills, to that restructuring committee. And so the group of the restructuring committee was able to, really handle a lot just on their own. But there were occasions where we had to go beyond that committee and get some advice. And that was primarily in the area of legal. So the first lawyer that we consulted was the actual lawyer for the Arabian Muslim Association. And he was very instrumental in making it clear to us on the board of the Arabian Muslim Association and to the community, in that the current board had to become a policy board. Okay, so as many of us have said earlier, this board of 9 people had become a working board, and that had to change. And so he really tried his best. He recognized that. Okay, he often said there's no way he'd want to be on the board of the Arabian Muslim Association because of all of the work, that was required. And he knew that it shouldn't be like that. So he's helped us in facilitating issues with CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, because we always have to keep in the back of our mind, as a charity, we can't afford to go offside on any of the decisions that we make. So he was very instrumental in helping us, stay on side in those areas. Also, we very recently have consulted with a charity lawyer because with all the, we're talking about changing, the governance and the organization and the operations, and creating a brand new mother organization that we're calling the Al-Rashid Foundation of Canada. And that in the end will, take the place of the Arabian Muslim Association. We still have to remember that there's at least $80 million of assets that have been accumulated by the Arabian Muslim Association while it has been a registered charity, here in Canada. So it's one thing to transfer governance and create a policy board and all this kind of good stuff, but you can't leave behind $80 million of assets in an organization that may not be compliant anymore. So we've recently consulted with, he is a charity lawyer. He has dealt with these issues in the past, and he's helping us navigate through this. Okay. So those are 2 examples of where we've gone beyond the committee to get advice.
Okay. Thank you, Najib. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. We've been talking about the process, that process that the 2019 to 2021. Now we're in 2022, and take a look at now from an impact side of things. That as you look at the work, and I know you're still lots of work going on even at this time, but as you look, you look at it from an impact on your organizational structure, your culture, and your operations. What were some of the key organizational level changes that have been made, Sammy, and why were they needed to be made? Just to give us, as you look, where you are now, as you take a look back, what were some of those key organizational level changes that were made?
Yeah. First of all, I think the governance structure, the diagram that you saw earlier on, we've had different versions of it, and we had to really make sure that everybody understands that. Once that was done, and I think we managed to get the buy-in from the board as well as from the community, the first thing that we set off was to really establish this new foundation, Al-Rashid Foundation of Canada. We wanted to kind of just set the thinking of a new environment and a new board structure. So this has been established, it has been incorporated, and as Najib had said, we're working now with the charity lawyer to make sure that the transition does not really undermines the goals and objectives of the original AMA. The second thing, when we looked at what is taking most of the time from the existing board, it was a Rashid Mosque. So it was very important that we create that Rashid Mosque board. We empower that board, and we make sure that that board now is fully responsible for what takes most of the time from the AMA or from the future Rashid Foundation. So this has been done. We have gone through the election process. We've gone through a process that the organization has never gone through, where we actually set an election, where we looked at diversity. We made sure that there's diverse representations from both gender as well as from age, educational backgrounds. And, it was an intentional election to make sure that we have a functioning board that provides all the expertise that a board of that sort needs. And that board is in place. But I have to put a warning here that just because you set a new board, don't just put it in place, forget about it, and then move on to other things. This board now comes in and they still don't know really what they need to do. So I would suggest to any organization, anybody who's listening here, is that don't just create the board and walk away. Make sure that you stay close to them, work with them to make sure that they understand, they take that heritage of 80 years and they understand the responsibility and what their expectations are. So, work closely with that. We are, and Brother Aslam and I and the AMA board are working closely with that board to make sure that they do what they basically signed for. Okay. The other thing that we're working on right now is we asked the board of a mosque to basically hire a new director to look after the day-to-day things, so they become a policy board. And also we're looking to separate, which is really a new model for us, but it's not a new model for many of the organizations online here, is that because we have so many organizations, and you've seen that in the chart, we said, okay, there's so many services that all of these organizations need in common. So we basically create a centralized service or a shared services model, where that shared services model basically serves all of these organizations, from marketing to communication to finance to accounting, etc. So all of these organizations, this central services becomes more like a contract services body that serves all of these organizations and they understand the context. So these are, I would say, probably the major accomplishments. But like I said, we're not done. We still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, still lots of work ahead. Taking a look at this now from opportunities that are there, still looking at the impact that you've had that, as a result of the restructuring. What are some of the opportunities that have come up as a result of this change? I'm going to ask Aslam first, and then Najib. What were some of those opportunities? And Aslam, I just want to mention that somebody mentioned if you could maybe just a little bit closer to the mic there. It sounds like you're not coming as loud as we're hoping. So Aslam first. Yeah, what are the opportunities that have come up as a result of this change?
I think the main opportunity that's come up is that there is a cultural change slowly, that there is now an acceptance that we needed to change, and a big example would be what Brother Sami was just talking about, was the board for the mosque, because that is the foundation pillar, so to speak, right? And so the very first board for the mosque was just established earlier this year, right? And so we sat back and said, well, how are we going to do this? And frankly, the advice from the current board was, you're going to have a hard time getting people, to come forward to sit on that board, And we said, okay, we'll see, I guess, And so we took the process on and said, let's create an election committee, okay? And so we took 3 people, 2 young ladies, one from the University of Alberta, one from another nonprofit organization, okay, and myself, and we became the election committee for the mosque board, okay? And so we kept the board apprised of what we're doing, but we kept them at a hands distance, so to speak. Okay, they couldn't influence anything about the election process. Okay, we set up a election process, self-nomination, went to the community, and lo and behold, we got 45 applications. Okay, and we had, as Brother Sami said, looked for certain skills, gender diversity, and so forth, and all of these criteria were outlined, and then the 3 committee members went through the 45 applications, and recommended 11 to the board. Okay, and so one of the challenges we faced when we recommended 11, they wanted a 15-member board. We felt 11 was more manageable, but that's fine. We agreed to the 15. Sometimes it's not worth arguing over numbers, so to speak, as long as the essence of what you're doing has been established. Okay. But the interesting part was that out of the 15 people, 4 women, first time ever since 1938. Okay. 11 people out of the 15 are under the age of 35. The current AMA board, as you can imagine, the 9 are all over 60, pretty well. So I think, that's a major cultural change and so forth. And now when we take a look at establishing the other entities boards, okay, including the ARFC board, right now it has an interim board, okay, because when you first registered with the government, you have to put in, generic bylaws and 6 people that would be on the board and so forth, right? So there is an interim board, but of course we're going to have to create a new board that, that's going to replace the AMA board from that perspective point of view. But you know what? We have an election process now that we've tested with the mosque, and it worked, and the community showed up.
Mhm.
And hopefully we can use the same.
Yeah, and you certainly got certainly a diverse more board too, as well as part of the whole process. Yeah. Najib, you want to weigh in on some of the opportunities that are there now as a result of all the effort and time and meetings and all those things that you went through?
Well, yes, I would. Many of the opportunities are, as Brother Aslam has just described, but there's many potential opportunities that if we are smart, we'll be able to realize those opportunities. I mean, as a current member of the board member of the Arabian Muslim Association, I was so excited to know that there was now a new board that was going to look after the Al-Rashid Mosque, because I realized how much responsibility that would lift from the board of the AMA. And it's been disappointing that this new board, which has been in place for almost a year, hasn't been supported enough by us. When I say us, I mean the current board of the Arabian Muslim Association. They have not been encouraged enough to be able to, take their positions seriously and know what their roles are and get on with the managing of the programs and services of the Al-Rashid Mosque. And so that's an amazing potential opportunity that we're still trying to, get working, I guess you could say. To me, if that can happen, and then the new board of the Al-Rashid Foundation of Canada truly then can go on to be like a real policy board and focus in on all of these projects that I had talked about initially when I was describing the history, because there's so much that this community needs, and we'll be able to focus on that.
Okay. Thank you, Najib. Moving into another area that I'd like to chat about just before we go for a break. Looking at success of the process, looking at it again, your 2022, how do you ensure success? What's going to be, how do you even evaluate success? Have you identified any indicators for the success of this project? And I'll turn it over to you, Sammy. What are some of those indicators of success? What are some things you're looking at to say, I think it's working, or we're going in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of a number of factors that need to be considered when you evaluate, have we succeeded in what we're doing? Are we accomplishing? And the first thing is that you look at your terms of reference and you look at your objectives for the committee. Are we accomplishing what we needed to do as a committee? Are we reaching the goals that we had set out? And then the establishment of an updated mission, vision, and value for the organizations. Have we been able to establish that? That's a big objective that you set out at the outset. So for us, we have been able to put that in writing. We've had approval from all various levels. Have we put together a governance structure for the organization? And I talked about that earlier on. Yes, we have. We have registered an organization that basically will govern according to that. We have established a new board for the mosque. So from a governance structure, we're starting to see that trickling effect. That we're seeing the fruit of our work by having these to establish groups. We've also are working on establishment of policies to guide the mission. So this is work that's in progress, but that's something that needs to be done still. And we have to be able to put together a self-evaluation for our boards. That work still needs to be done. So I would say probably 5 or 6 different factors that need to be put in place and need to be evaluated from time to time. And then you need to put a check mark. This is done. This is in progress. This is not touched yet. So these are things that that we're still working on.
Okay. Thank you, Sammy. Just to maybe one point more, I'm going to ask Aslam to answer this question. Looking at it from the board members, with the new board members in their work, we got a board that's diverse, where we really did some inroads and some things like that. What are some things you're going to do to ensure there's success of the new board members in their work that you're going to make sure we stay true to?
Yeah, so I think we want to make sure that they have the courage to take on the task that's been given to them, the mosque board that we're talking about. As I said, 11 of the 15 are under the age of 35. Although they've been associated with the organization as volunteers and so forth, they don't have the governance training and so forth. So that's one of the things that we are doing, is we did an orientation. We went and did a governance training. We've been asked to come back again to do the governance training. We're working with the bylaws with them. We're trying to establish their board committees, and we have some drafts of terms of reference for their board committees, and so a more contact needs to happen. We're in the process of doing it, right? But it takes time and commitment, so one of the things you got to be is patient, so I think if we can get that done, I think the other thing we mentioned a little earlier was if we can hire the director for the mosque, right? Because then the board can focus more on the policies, and then the director and the staff, who are very competent and exist now, can carry on with the implementation of the numerous programs that the mosque itself delivers.
Okay, thank you, Aslam. The formal Q&A portion of our session today. I'm going to read some of the questions that have come in the chat box. We do have one first question here. This came during when we were having our conversation. The question is, was it hard to get buy-in from the board in the first place, right from the start? What is to get that buy-in? I think that's a big, a question that all of us have. How do you get that right from, in the first place, right from the start? Who would like to tackle that question?
Well, I'll give it a try, Scott. Seeing how I am on the board. Amy, that is a very, very good question. And especially when you only have 9 people. I can tell you that maybe 3 of us, I know myself, the board chair, and maybe one other person for sure knew that we needed to do the to restructure. The reason that the 2 or 3 of us felt it is because we were on the ground every day. So our board chairman, for example, is a very successful business person. He has the ability to come to the Al-Rashid Mosque every single day. Believe it or not, he even chairs the weekly staff meetings. Myself, I've been retired now for approximately 5 years. So I'm able to come to the mosque every day and participate in, in various committees and work directly with the staff. So because of that, we knew that we needed to restructure because that just wasn't normal, okay? To have a board chairman and the vice president showing up every day and participating like we were. But the remainder of the board who are, like just regular guys working, had a job during the day. They weren't there all the time. And in fact, their participation basically was showing up to a board meeting, twice a month. And so I don't think they appreciated the need for the restructuring as much as the minority of us did. And it was only because the few of us were there all the time, feeling the pressure, feeling the responsibilities, and knowing that there had to be a better way. So I don't know if that answers the question for Amy, but that's what I've got to say.
Yeah. Thanks, Najib. Does anybody want to chime in, Sammy or Aslam, anything to add into that? Or
maybe I can just add one more thing here. Repeat is all I can say. We needed to repeat the message to the board time and time again. Be receptive and be very, very good listeners. There are some vocal members of any board, and there are some that really prefer not to speak out. So you really, by repeating and by being a careful listener, you allow others to give you the input. And sometimes that's a very valuable input. So we needed to make sure that people understand that. But we also wanted to make sure that we're not here to dictate. As a committee, we're there to listen and to react and to propose. And at the end of the day, it's up to the board to approve or not. So this board, I really congratulate this board. They understand how long it takes, and they're still working with us. And if you have a board that has the patience, has the time, and the bandwidth to work with you for all along, consider yourself very lucky. Not all boards are like this.
Okay, so listening, definitely some understanding the importance of both sides. Listening and understanding sounds like a message I'm hearing from you, Sammy. Let's move into another question here. Nomination committee is often the most important committee. I personally prefer the word board development committee terminology. Did you make use of a nomination or a board development committee to deal with your challenging transformation? And if so, how effective was this committee? Did you have anything like that in your work?
So maybe I can answer that question in the sense that, we established the mosque board, right, emanating from the AMA. No, there wasn't a nomination committee. And specifically in this instance, we actually, as I indicated earlier, wanted to remove the current board to an arm's length perspective, okay? Because we actually wanted to go to the community to establish the mosque board and have people self-nominate. And so the small election committee, okay, prepared all the forms and all the logistics and so forth. Now, if we were, and which we will in the future, be a policy board, yes, a nominating committee or a board development committee, combination of both, is an important feature of a good policy board governance.
Can I just add one more thing to this?
Sure, absolutely.
I think we need to differentiate between a professional organizational board, where you're dealing with maybe the membership could be businesses or could be not individuals, and on one side, on the other side, a community-based organization, where the community really the mechanics of that works differently than if your members were companies or professionals. So in a community base, you really need to understand that there are some community pressures that come to you if you were to sort of nominate people to your board. There's always a question, and I think it happens in every community, where the members start to question why you're nominating X, Y, Z over the other. And there's favoritism. There's the cousin of my brother, or cousin of my brother is my cousin, but you understand what I'm trying to say. So you really have to be, I sit on another board that uses a nomination committee process very successfully. The nominating committee would basically nominate members, board members to the board. The board would approve those, then it will go to the membership, and the membership votes on that. It's a very successful system. It works for that organization. But I think on a community base, we have to kind of maybe go through the election process, the full election process, in order to have people either self-nominate or have somebody nominate them.
Okay. Thank you, Sami, on that. The question here, did you go out to the general community to consult on priorities, or did you develop your plan, your strategic plan, or whatever that, the plan, whatever you describe it as, with only board members? Wondering the whole general community, getting out to the general community to consult on priorities. How did that work? What did that look like?
We did. We had a couple of town halls with community members, invited them, and presented what we were presenting to the board, same material, and taking their questions and answering them. And at the same time, the board was listening as well. So yes, we did consult the community.
Okay. Here's a question, and I think this is probably somebody has taken a look at how much time it takes. How many hours are spent in meetings like this, and were they paid? How did this look? How did this your experience? How many hours? Can you even put an estimate on a number of hours you spent in meetings, and were you getting any money for those meetings?
Well, I can answer the second part of that question. At the Arabian Muslim Association, no one gets paid. No board member, no committee member. It is strictly, from the heart, and it's all volunteer. I can also say that I don't know how many hours. It's many, many hours. And all I can say is that when you have committed people, then there's nothing that they can't accomplish. They put forward their time. I'm sure that there are consequences, probably their spouses are saying like, how come I never see you, and all this kind of stuff. I know this is going on, but God puts something inside of you and you become committed, and they just do. And we're very, very fortunate that whether we're talking about the current board members or whether we're talking about the restructuring committee members or any other members, it can only, if I told you about our construction committee and the amount of volunteer hours that they put in, I mean, you just wouldn't believe it. So no, nobody gets paid. And it's just, the blessings of God that have put people like Aslam and Samia, in our laps.
Yeah.
Maybe I can add to that, actually, is that we need to distinguish between being a board member and a volunteer. Okay. A board member from a governance point of view, sets the directions and provides oversight to the organization. What we have here currently is they're also being the volunteers doing the work, being the administrative board, or even just within programs, volunteering and so forth. So a lot of the board members are there constantly. And one of the things that we've indicated to them is separate those two duties. You be a board member, and if you are passionate about certain program, go work in that program as a volunteer, but not with your board hat. You need to change your hats, okay? Because otherwise it gets quite confusing for the staff and for the public as well. Now from a how many hours is a good indicator of a board member. If it's a good governance board and works from a governance perspective point of view, right, I'd probably say 6 to 8 hours a month should be what they should be putting in. Okay. And the rest of it, yeah, you want to volunteer as many hours as you want on various programs and committees, that's up to you. But in terms of the board and the board committees, it shouldn't be more than 6 to 8 hours a month.
Okay. Thank you, Aslam. Even the distinction of board, when you're a board member in the governance role versus, a volunteer in a program or implementing a program or an activity, making that distinction very, very clear. I know in some of our sessions we identify that. And again, thank you for emphasizing the importance of making sure that distinction is very, very clear in your work. And maybe kind of connected right to that question, we start looking at staff and volunteers. How critical is it for, and another question from Joel, is it for for board members, especially the members on the board, to be visible to staff and participate in events and activities? And sometimes there's there seems some nervousness and in that relationship. Again, with the changes going on, how is just some thoughts and ideas around board members and their visibility to staff, particularly in events and activities. So what is some of your thoughts there?
So maybe I can go off. So I sit on a number of boards. I do my best to attend most public activities that those organizations have, whether it is a social, whether it is a presentation or whatever it is. I like to be present there, not as a board member, but more of a supporter to the administration, a supporter to the staff, and a supporter to the cause. I don't really present myself as a board member, but to be there, I think it's very important for the staff to see their board being supportive in that way. But I can say that it can take a different direction, and it can become extreme, as we have seen with ourselves, really, where we have become far too visible that we blurred the line between board and management, and to me that's a dangerous territory. So I don't really I don't see that the role of a board member. I think a board member needs to be visible when they need it to be visible, and then let the staff and the administration do their work when they need to.
I think one of the things that happens when we blur that line is, is the staff looking at you as a board member, or is looking at you as a volunteer, the person next to you, let's say, who's not on the board and is a volunteer, and so you shouldn't be getting preferential treatment when you're working as a volunteer in a program, even though you're a board member.
And Sammy and Aslam will have to have you come in when we do our session, board staff relationship session that we do. I think some of the points that you made there are right in line with some of the thoughts and ideas that that are presented in that session. So thank you for emphasizing the importance of that. We are together. We didn't get to everybody's questions, so certainly apologies for that. But we do want to hear again before our time is up with Sammy and Aslam and Najib, a key message from each of you. As you send it out to the people, our listeners that are in on the session today, as you think about for other nonprofit boards who may be thinking of restructuring, what is a key message that you have for those folks that are going down that path or going down that path in the future? And I'll start, Aslam, start with you. What is a key message that you have?
I would say be patient. It takes time for people to digest changes, okay? And especially if it affects them. And so in nonprofit organizations, especially that are delivering services to communities and so forth, board members get so attached to a certain program or something that as if it is them doing it, so to speak, versus providing the oversight and the guidance, and so you just have to be patient, and cultural change takes time.
Okay. Thank you, Aslam. Key message for other groups restructuring that Najib, what is the key message that you have for other groups that might be going down the path?
Well, okay, I definitely want to repeat what Aslam said about the patience. But I'd like to add to that there has to be also, I don't know what the right word is. It's not to be aggressive, but the restructuring committee and the board of directors need to be more proactive in making change. So I can tell you, we would have, restructuring committee would come to the board and present, what the next steps are and things such as that. And then nothing would happen. Nothing would happen. We talked about earlier that we put in place a brand new board to manage and direct the programs and services for the Al-Rashid Mosque. And because, the current board, didn't really do anything in terms of promoting or helping, that board sort of languished. So there has to be an effort to make things happen. Yes, you have to be patient, but at the same time, you have to be working hard to make these changes. So that's what I got to say.
Yeah, so be patient, but also you need to be working hard and moving forward at the same time. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, thank you, Najib. Sammy, the final word is yours as a key message for those that are going down the path of restructuring. What is a message that you have for them?
No pressure. I'm a big fan of town hall meetings. I love town hall meetings. It really is serves like a mirror. You're looking at yourself in the mirror. and you want to see, do you see what you like? And a lot of times, it's very easy to have a misalignment between your priorities as a board and your members' priorities. Town hall meetings bring you that, and it is a signal, and you have to be, again, keep talking about being a good listener. You really need to be in tune with what your members are looking for. And if that need from the community requires you to make a change, then you really have to question the reasons. Sometimes it's not a full-fledged restructuring. Sometimes it's a tweak that does not require that. But I can't emphasize enough that in order for you to undertake a process like restructuring, you have to sit down and put very, very clear reasons why you need to make that change. We've been doing this now for 3 years. We probably will be doing that for another couple of years before we're done. So it's not a small undertaking. So question the reasons for this. Listen to your members very, very carefully. Come up with objectives for the change. Then go back to your members. Say, if we do this, would we be on the same page? And keep doing that. Don't get tired of doing this, because once you step on that treadmill, boy, it's fast going, and you better be ready for it.
Thank you, Sammy. Just thank you for the the words of wisdom on key messages moving forward. All three of you, I think we, even by some of the comments and some of the that we're seeing here, those messages are being well heard, and it leads us to so on behalf of the Community Development Unit and the participants here today, wow, I would like to thank the three of you for sharing your perspectives and lived experiences. I think this is a great chance that we've had today, and as we heard from the panelists, it's always going to be restructuring. It's always going to be challenging. But hopefully, from our exploration today, we've gained some insight strategies as well as some lessons learned from the real life nonprofit, the Al-Rashid Foundation Mosque. We do these sessions and trainings, information we provide, but it's nothing like having an organization that has had to go through the process, the pains, the challenges, the successes, the opportunities that are there now. And so a thank you so much for the three of you for making time to be with us. And I think it's for the benefit of all not-for-profits right across Alberta, the wisdoms and ideas and the learnings that you shared with us today. Again, we are really, Aslam, Najib, Sami, very, very grateful for sharing your time with us. Cannot say enough thank you for doing that. Really, really appreciate it. And also want to mention that if anybody wants to get a hold of us in Community Development Unit, that's you heard today, that's myself or Shanaz or Joel or Kelly and the rest of our unit. There's a number of people that would certainly answer your call. You can see a number that's on the phone, or if you want to email us, we'd be more than happy to try to answer your questions, your thoughts, your ideas. And whatever the board governance topic it might be, we'll certainly do our best to try to get an answer. And if we don't have it right there, we'll try to get it for you at a later date. And finally, I just want to say, again, on behalf of the community development, thank you. Obviously, panelists, again, thank you for your time. Again, as we mentioned earlier, Sami, Aslam, and Najib, your time with us was so valuable. I think we've all gained so much from hearing the Al-Rashid story of restructuring. I think that's going to make be a very, very helpful for any other not-for-profits that are going down that path or thinking about going down that path. I also want to say thank you to all participants that took the time to be here to attend this session, this nonprofit bistro session. And I think one of the things I want to say, the work that you do out there, whether you're a board member, whether you're a staff member, whether you're a volunteer of not-for-profit organizations out there, we all have so much more because of the work that you do out there, whatever that not-for-profit organization that you're a part of or that you support. I think that gives us all in our community so much more that we have to be able to, opportunities that we have. So thank you. So as a final goodbye, take care, stay healthy. And hopefully we'll see you at another webinar session somewhere down the road. Take care and bye for now.